Amen. Why don't you grab a seat? Really good to see you this morning, especially those who are visiting. Pardon me. My name is Alistair. I'm one of the pastors here. Many people know me as Ali. And it's my joy just to bring something from God's Word right now. So if you do happen to have a Bible with you, I am reading from Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through to 20. I'm just going here to get my drink. Oh, I'm wrecking the place. I'll go this way. There's a hard way to do something, I'll find it. Okay, so Mark 5, 1 through to 20. And it says there, they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out of them and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in numbers, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. So those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told them about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell all the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. So it's a story where a man encounters Jesus. And this man's in a completely terrible state. He lived in tombs. No one could restrain him. Such was his rage and his anger and everything that was going on. No one could help him, even though they tried in their own way to help him. He was in such a terrible turmoil that he would cry out, that he would rage, that he would cut himself with stones. I mean, this guy is in a mess. It is not a pretty picture. In fact, it's quite a sad picture if we think about it. And some of us might think, and I have to be honest, I thought whenever I was even reading it there, that's quite an intense story for a morning like today. But it is our text for today. And there's something that grabbed me within the story. And those of you who have been tracking with us over the last while, we've been doing a series called Questions That Jesus Asked. And there's a question in this that grabbed me and took me a little bit by surprise. And the question is this: Jesus asks this man, in the midst of everything that's going on, "What is your name?" Now, you see, if I'm honest, if I get into the story, that's a little bit bizarre. Because here's this, what seems to be a crazed man who has been cutting himself, been chained up, been lots of things, living in the tombs, living in a cemetery. This man that's completely, seemingly out of his mind, running towards Jesus. I don't know about you, I may not have been asking him what his name was. I may have been wanting to just go the other way. Anybody else want to go the other way? Right? And so, but Jesus asks him in the course of their interaction, "What is your name?" But you see, names are important. Names are really important. Now in English, names are, Hannah, the English teacher, names are what? Nouns is the answer, English teacher. Okay, yes, I think I woke her up. No, I'm only joking. I'm only joking. She was praying for me. Um, so, um, so names are what? They are nouns, right? They describe us. So often whenever we're picking names, we're not really thinking about the names of it. We're not thinking about the destiny of our children. Sometimes we are, but often it's because it's a family connection. It's a name that we like. It's a name that we heard. It's whatever it might be. For example, like we called Emily Emily because we just like the name Emily. But biblical names are. They're different. You see, I learned this recently. Biblical names are actually not nouns, they're verbs. I don't know an adjective is a describing word, but they tell us something about what the person is to do. They tell us something about what the process of their birth or the coming about of their birth or even what is expected of them. Let me give you a couple of examples. There's a guy in the Bible called Jacob, and Jacob means heel grabber, and he literally, whenever he was born as a twin, but he grabbed onto his brother's heel. But it also describes something of his life, his character, who he was, because he was a wee bit of he was up to mischief. He was up to no good all the time. He was sort of a wee bit deceitful. And that's what his name meant. But then Jacob has this encounter with God, and God changes his name to Israel, who the nation is named after. And Israel means God, let me read that. God perseveres. God preserves. God preserves. And so it shows this change. Jacob, who's after everything he can get out of life, and he will manipulate and lie to get it. So he's had this encounter with God, and now his life's about, well, God's going to provide. God's going to preserve me. I don't need to do all that lying and manipulation again. It's a change of character, so God changes his name in the midst of it. There's other people. We think of Saul, who was a persecutor of the church, and he becomes Paul, who writes most of the New Testament to tell us things about who God is. We think of a lady in the Old Testament, and she wanted her name to be changed to Mara, which meant bitter, because her experience had been bitter. But by the end of the book of Ruth, she's being called Naomi, again, which means pleasant, because it talks about the experience of her life. So names are important in the Bible, and we need to take notice. And given this fact, the fact that Jesus asks this guy, what is your name? Then Jesus is asking him more than how do you want me to reference you? What do you want me to call you whenever I'm shouting down the street at you? He's not just saying that. He's saying, what is your identity? What is going on in your life? How do you see yourself? Who are you? And that's what Jesus is asking whenever he's asking this man, what is your name? And the answer is really, it's striking. He says, my name is Legion, for we are many. Now, there's a lot in there to unpack, and I'm not really going to go everywhere in there. But let me say this. He names himself by a number of things that are going on within his life. He names himself by the bondage, by the fact that there's stuff going on in his life that is trapping him and holding him, and he names that. He names the fact that there's brokenness within his life, and he names that. And he names the fact that there's baggage that he has carried. And I want to talk a little bit about those three things as we move forward. You see, this guy, he names himself as something that is not healthy or helpful at all. He names himself according to, first of all, his bondage. His bondage. You see, he calls himself Legion. His life is held in darkness by an army of enemies. When he thought of himself, he's seen his bondage. He's seen his struggle. He's seen his defeat. He's seen that thing that was holding him, trapping him, and keeping him tight. Now, you're going, boy, I've come here. Does he think I'm like that? Well, no. There's nobody in this room that's in the state that this guy was in, because we wouldn't be able to sit and listen. We wouldn't be, we'd really, really, really need help. But we all know that there are varying degrees of things within life. And we can all walk through life with areas and certain categories of bondage, certain categories of things that hold us and trap us. Of course, as I say, we aren't as bad as what we're picturing in this story. I mean, life has done its worst to this guy that we're reading in the story. But there are things that happen in our lives that create bondage. You see, whenever I think of bondage, I think of a number of different things. I think of addictions. I think of things that started off as a fun thing or started off as a helpful thing, but then they become something that grips us, that wraps us, that has us. It's something that was helpful to something that holds us. When we think of things in our lives that can hold us, and all of us have known somebody that started off having a wee tipple because it helped them in the evening cope, but it became an addiction, it became a trap, it became something that held them. Somebody that thought it was good fun, and hey, it might be every now and again to put a bet on a football game, but suddenly gambling becomes the thing that grips them. It becomes something that they can't get away from. For some, it might be what they watch on the internet or on TV. For some people, it might be spending, and you think, oh, wee bit of retail therapy, but you know that it's actually got completely out of control. Now, you're all looking at me going, not me, not me, not me. But the reality is, a room this size, there could be people in this room. And on the outside, there's loads of stuff that looks okay. But on the inside, there's stuff that holds us. There's stuff that grips us. There's stuff that we thought at one stage we could control, but now it's controlling us. Or what about for some of us? It mightn't be those things. It might be toxic emotions. Things that start off as a natural reaction, but that emotion starts to ingrain itself into our very being, into the very part of our lives. It's like it starts to inject poison into our souls. Things like jealousy, where it started off thinking, oh, I wish I could be like the cool kids in school, or I wish I could have the holiday they're having, or I wish I could go. But it steals your complete joy, and you can't live in joy because all you're doing is comparing yourself with everything else that's going on. And jealousy has got a hold on your heart, or maybe it's anger, and maybe you were right to be angry in the start, but that anger has flooded your heart to which point every waking moment, there's hardly ever a moment where you're not free from feeling that rage or that frustration or that anger because of injustice or something that has been done. Or maybe it's bitterness or unforgiveness, and someone has treated you in a certain way and you just cannot let go of that. Or fear. My goodness, how many people are gripped with fear today? And anxiety and this, and it grips us and holds us, and maybe some of us are held. And I understand. I am feeling in the moment this is intense, but this is real life. And in church, we don't hide away from real life because we believe that God wants to engage us, not in our superficiality, but in the reality of who we are and what's going on in our lives. You see, for me, I view a lot of these things and bondage in our lives. And it's, I don't know whether you ever watched, you ever seen a film, thankfully I've never seen it live, but these sticky rat traps, and it actually seems horrible. But you see them walking onto it and they get stuck in there like trying to move it. So they put another foot on to try and get moved, and in the end they're completely stuck. Or a fly in a spider's web where it lands, it can't get out, and it wriggles and it moves, and the more it wriggles, the more it wrestles, the more trapped it is. And there are things in our lives that can do that to us. The Bible talks about these things and uses terms like the slimy pit, the mire, or the mud. And it's an idea that we find ourselves in a hole that we in and of ourselves cannot get out of. This man in this story is in a hole that he can't get himself out of. He's in a predicament that he cannot free himself from. But one encounter with Jesus, and he is completely freed. You see, Psalm 40, verse 1-3 says this about God. It says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and out of the mire, and he set my feet on a rock. He gave me a firm place to stand. That's what our God does for us. He sets us free from those things that grip us and bind us. Jesus comes to set us free. In Luke chapter 4, 18-19, it's like Jesus' mantra, Jesus' mission statement. And he says, I've come to heal the brokenhearted, to set the prisoners free. Jesus came so that those things that want to hold us tight can be loosed from our lives. He's a chain breaker. He's the one that lifts us out. You see, here's the reality. Sometimes we think Christianity is like a bolt-on onto our lives. Sometimes we think Jesus is like someone who's just going to come and make life just that little bit better. And maybe I'll think about it at some stage or whatever. And sometimes we think like Jesus is a little bit like this. See, the reality is most of us were living, and if we're outside of Christ, I'm just going to be there, we're living in a sinking ship. We're living in a sinking ship that's going down. And sometimes we think, well, a wee bit of Jesus in my life, do you know what? That'll be a wee bit of nice music. It'll make me feel better about the boat going down. Or maybe a wee bit of steak or a wee bit of something else. It'll make me feel better. A wee jacuzzi, lying out, chilling out. But the boat's still sinking. That's not what Jesus does. Jesus comes and he completely rescues us. He lifts us from the sinking boat and he puts our feet on a solid place to stand. That's what Jesus does. He rescues us. Once upon a time, a man fell into a pit and he couldn't get himself out. A sensitive person came along and said, I feel for you down there. A practical person came along and said, I knew you were going to fall down there sooner or later. A Pharisee or a religious person came along and said, only bad people fall into the pit. A mathematician calculated how far he had fallen. A news reporter wanted an exclusive on his story on life in the pit. The HMRC wrote him a letter asking was he paying taxes on his pit. A self-pitying person said, you haven't seen anything until you've seen my pit. A mystic said, just imagine that you're not in a pit. An optimist said, things could be worse. A pessimist says, things will get worse. But Jesus, seeing the man, took him by the hand and lifted him out of the pit. Jesus rescues us. Jesus rescues us. And you might be here today and you need that rescue. Or you might be here and life's pretty swimming at the minute and you're thinking, none of that applies to me. Someday, remember the words, Jesus comes to rescue us. Because there's a day in all of our lives when we need to reach out and grab his hand. So this guy identified himself around his bondage, but Jesus came to set him free. This man in the story identified himself around his brokenness. Around his brokenness. You see, life had done its worst to this guy. He was as broken could be. His mind was broken. His heart was broken. He was filled with rage and hatred. His life is in complete disarray. Now again, please don't be offended at me. I'm not saying any of us are in that state. But again, all of us live with brokenness. The Bible talks about it. It tells us that we all live with brokenness. If we go back to God's big story is that he created us. And it says in Genesis 1 and 2 that whenever he created us, that it was good. But then in Genesis 3, it tells us about this thing called sin that came into the world. Theologians call it the fall. And it's like that fall from perfection, that fall from good. And brokenness entered into our lives, into the world that we look. We see natural disasters. We see things that just don't work. We live in a broken world, and we are broken people who live in a broken world. And every part of our lives has that brokenness to some degree. Our minds, our wills, our hearts, our emotions. There's an element of brokenness in all of our lives. It's why we need Jesus. But there's that element of brokenness within our lives. Now, what I'm not saying is that we're worthless wrecks. What I'm not saying is, you're completely done. No, there's still that resemblance of the image of God in all of our lives, but there is brokenness. There's brokenness. It's manifested in a life that we live without wanting to know our Creator, and we want to do our own thing and live our own way and be independent and not live in everything that he created us to be. It's found when we don't do the things we're meant to do, when we do things we shouldn't do, when our minds are in turmoil, when our emotions are in turmoil. It's found in all of those moments, and every single one of us, if we will have a season, we will have moments, we will have times when we're really aware of that brokenness more than others. For I'm sure a lot of reasons this man's life has seen this brokenness come to full fruition in every area of his life. And it's incredibly sad. So we may not be at that scale, but I wonder, do we see our brokenness and view ourselves through it? Do we only see the broken parts of our heart and our lives? And that's all that we see. We see what we haven't been or haven't done. We see the broken heart that still is there, that hasn't fully mended. We see the bruises and the wounds that are on our heart from having lived in a broken world. We carry with us, some of us, fear, anxiety, depression. And can I even dare to say what we see in this man, some of us may even have that other people don't even recognize yet, is self-loathing, hatred of self, even coming out to self-harm. These things exist, guys, and they exist in church. They exist when we're all smiling. But it goes on in our lives. It's part of the brokenness of the world that we live in. Can I remind you today again of a scripture I've already said? Luke 4:18. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted. Jesus wants to heal the brokenhearted. I remember quite a few years ago sitting with a woman in a coffee shop in another church. And she wanted to know a little bit about Jesus, and her life had been difficult. Things had been hard. And, you could just see, she couldn't even seem to walk straight. The heaviness of life was on her. And I talked to her about Jesus for a while, and I talked to her experience about Jesus. And, eventually she came, I need Jesus. I do need this. And I led her in this really simple prayer of salvation. And for me, it was the most dramatic thing I've ever seen. So don't be thinking it's like this all the time. But I think on the inside, it's like this. And what started to happen for this lady, as she started to say, Jesus, I want you to come and rescue me. You could literally see a weight lifting off her. She started to cry as burdens started to lift and go. And then she started to laugh as peace and joy came. And we had this moment, probably for about 30 minutes, where Jesus just started to do something. It was a process, but started to do something in her life that started to mend her heart. We started a conversation with her heavy, broken. We finished a conversation with her on the way to finding the one who would rescue her. God heals our brokenness. He heals our brokenheartedness. I don't know if you have thought of God as a tyrant or harsh or hard. He's a good Father who wants to draw near to you and to me. Can I say this? Jesus wants to heal you today. He is real. He is true. He has pure love, and he longs for you to know him. He longs for you to know him. Let me finish with this, and thank you so much for your patience this morning. I know it's warm in here. Last thing, this guy sees himself from his baggage. From his baggage, you see, I often wonder, and part of one of my roles in life is to ask this question, what got him to there? What's the story behind the story? Anybody else wonder that at times? How did they get there? You see, everybody's got a story, don't they? And sometimes we look at somebody and they do something and we want to criticize and we want to have a go. But everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a backdrop. And whenever you hear somebody's story, I'm not saying it makes what to do right, but it helps you understand a wee bit more how they got to there. You've got a story. I've got a story. We've all got a story. And this man must have had a story. He wasn't just born like this crazed person who wanted to live in a cemetery. He wasn't born like there must have been things that maybe choices he made himself, maybe things that had been done on him or towards him that had caused him to get to this place where he was. What was his story? And his story acted for him like baggage that weighed him down and pulled him away from the life that he was meant to have. And so let me ask this, what's your story today? What is your story? Does it come with lots of baggage? Does it come with, well, I've made lots of wrong choices, or maybe one big wrong choice? Maybe there's been hurt and injustice in your life. Maybe there's been moments of being treated unjustly and wrongly. Maybe some of the baggage that we carry is rejection from relationships or parents or things that we've walked through. Maybe we've been mistreated or the mistakes that we've made, whatever it might be. What can happen is these things begin to define us and they begin to weigh us down. But in Jesus, we've got hope, because the story that we've lived doesn't have to be the story we keep on living. We get to be able to see the script shifted and changed. We get to see God do something incredible in our lives. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone and the new has come. There's good news today. And I know this has been intense, but let me finish with good news. Jesus gives us a new start. Jesus is able to take that baggage. He's able to cut it off us, and we're able to live light and free because Jesus wants to give us a new beginning. The old is gone, the new is here. Where do we see this man at the end of the story? Clothed and in his right mind. There's redemption, there's rescue, there's everything that you could have hoped for this man. His life is completely changed. Why? Because he met Jesus. He met Jesus, and I'm convinced people in this world, in this broken world, need to meet Jesus. Guys, can we come? Always like to bring the worship team up. It gives you hope that I'm nearly done. And I promise I am, okay? And as I say, I've said it a number of times, I know this is fairly intense this morning, but it's what I felt I needed to bring. And we bring it. I came across a story. And the story was this beautiful jewelry shop on a main street. And it had all the high-end stuff that most of us, you might look in the window and see watches for, £10,000 and all this sort of. It was one of those jewelry stores. And so people would have gone in, and there was this one particular piece of jewelry, and it had no price near it. And it sat in a case on its own. And it was absolutely gorgeous. It caught everybody's eye. And so people would have looked at this one particular piece of jewelry. And a lot of the rich people would have walked in and, they had already bought loads of stuff in it. And they had come in and went, excuse me, jeweler, how much for that? And the jeweler would always answer the same question. He would say, it will cost you everything you have. It'll cost you everything you have. And of course, at that, most people turned away. Walked away and said, I forget that. That's too expensive. One day, outside, the rain was coming down. There was thunder and there was lightning. The weather was horrific. And to get himself out of this horrific shower, this homeless man with his trolley and his wee trinkets pushes into the jewelry store. And everybody's like, what's he doing here? And he, to try and fit in, starts to look around. He's looking at all the watches. He's looking at all the rings, and he sees this one beautiful piece of treasure, of this beautiful jewelry. And he says, here, mate. Which is obviously from Belfast. Here, mate. How much for that? And the jeweler says, same answer. It'll cost you everything you have. He thinks about it for a second. He says, everything? The jeweler says, everything. So he takes his coat off, puts it in his trolley, pushes it over and says, here you go. And the jeweler takes out his key, opens it up, and hands him the most precious treasure. Do you know, as we come to Jesus, we might look, how much is it to have the life that I was intended to have? How much is it to have the peace of God? How much is it to have peace with God? How much is it to have the life that I was created to have and in connection with this Creator? Can I tell you, it'll cost you everything that you have. And what sometimes we need to realize, what we have is brokenness. What we have is baggage. What we have is elements of our bondage. And God will go, stick it in the trolley, give it over, and I'll take it. And I'll give you the treasure of new life. That's God's invitation to you, to me, and to all of us. I wonder, are you willing today to lay it all down so that you could be new?
Thank you.